In an instant that shocked the world and echoed around continents, a battle-hardened Swiss guard broke rank, halberd clutched firmly, and deviated from centuries-old honored tradition. Was it a slip, a menace, a deliberate betrayal? Or might it have been something much more personal, something irresistibly human? Before we lay out the event that rattled the very foundations of the Vatican, click that subscribe button and leave a comment below telling us where you're listening from. This is a tale you'll be seeing through to the very end. Matteo's tale doesn't start in Rome, but in the sleek geometry of a small town named Tor in Bern. He grew up in a household where perfection wasn't a recommendation, it was a mandate. A crooked seam destroys a suit, his father would remind him. People notice the blemish before they see the workmanship. Those are the words that molded Matteo like wet clay. Almost from the time he was a child, his life was held together with order and control. But destiny had its eyes on Rome. Matteo never imagined he'd walk the cobblestone paths of Vatican City wearing one of history's most iconic uniforms. His grandfather had once served during the reign of Pope John Paul II, his portrait hanging proudly in their hallway, halberd raised, jaw firm, eyes like polished granite. It is a legacy that spoke to Matteo until he could no longer deny it. At 22, he made it to the Pontifical Swiss Guard and aced each test with unyielding discipline. 3 years later, he was mounting guard at the church's most solemn ceremonies, a role granted to the best of the best only. He donned the red, blue, and yellow signature uniform, not for vanity, but with quiet pride. To him, the uniform wasn't material. It was history wrapped around his shoulders. Matteo's record was unblemished, never late, never wavering. Even in a harsh summer, when another guard collapsed in the blistering sun, Matteo remained steadfast. Eyes ahead, hands firm. The regulation was straightforward. Hold position until relieved. Zwingli's not a man, someone had once hissed. He's a metronome with lungs. But under that discipline, feeling brewed quietly, Matteo thought control was the ultimate expression of respect. Only someone saw past his stoic facade, his sister Lena. As children, she would drape curtains around his shoulders and say he was her royal guard. Matteo never lost character, but he always went along with it. Lena was the rhythm of his reserved world, and when she passed away at 19, her appendicitis diagnosed as something inconsequential, Matteo's world shattered in silence. He recalled each detail, the nurse's hesitation, the doctor's delay, the strict protocols that lost a life. That winter, sorrow hardened into determination. He became a Swiss guard, and for 13 years he talked less and observed more. Matteo became the quiet guardian that photographers loved. Tall, symmetrical, impossibly motionless. He was a statue with air. To most, he was ceremonial, harmless, ornamental. What they didn't know was that he once defeated an armed intruder with one pivot and wrist lock. His job was not to attract attention. It was to become so completely a part of stillness that he became incorporated into the stonework of the Vatican. Even stone can break, however, and one day it did. Would I be believed if I were to tell you that one intact man, in one single motion, broke centuries of Vatican procedure and redefined the rules of silence? Hang in there, because in the next installment of this tale, we spill the beans on what really went down, why he did it, and what it does to the Swiss Guard's legacy. And more importantly, on that day, Pope Leo XIV entered the limelight for his own inauguration. A silent shake went through the roots of Vatican tradition, and Matteo Zwingli happened to be present to see it. They told him his election was never meant to be. He wasn't the favorite or the second choice. To some, he was a compromise, a young and unconventional candidate, unknown to many. But when the white smoke swirled into the Italian air above the Sistine Chapel, everyone knew it. The conclave had spoken. Cardinal João Luís Santiago of Brazil was now Pope Leo XIV. The world blinked in shock. The name Leo had not adorned the papacy in more than a century. The previous one to be given it was a rigid conservative, an intellectual who once railed against modernity as a cancer within the church. But this new Leo was not like that. He had traversed the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, washed the feet of the overlooked, heard confessions in beat-up shipping containers. He was not refined. He was there. He hadn't been raised in the halls of the Vatican. He had risen from the hardness of actual ministry. Matteo observed the announcement from the barracks, his fellow guards around him. An awed silence surrounded the room as Leo emerged onto the balcony. Someone muttered, "That is not the man they wanted." But that didn't matter. It was the man that the church had wanted. Inside the Vatican, there was unease humming beneath the surface. Some cardinals draped themselves in disapproval like armor. The bureaucrats complained in coded whispers, disturbed by Leo's lack of regard for protocol. Security personnel were already in an uproar. This pope declined the bulletproof glass and would not travel in the armored popemobile. Some worried that his humility would be his death before his reforms could take hold. Matthew did see something no one else seemed to comment on, the glint in Leo's eyes. Not bravado, not defiance, conviction. The face of a man who knew the burden now on his shoulders, and, in silence, decided to bear it anyway. Then came the genuine surprise. Leo began stripping away the traditions step by step. He rejected the traditional golden throne, opting for a plain wooden one. The lengthy ceremonial procession, cut short, the red papal slippers, exchanged for battered brown leather shoes from Brazil, and when he proposed giving part of his first mass off the cuff, the master of ceremonies almost collapsed. He's not only breaking with tradition, one senior official grumbled, he's destroying the scaffolding. And still, the Swiss Guard obeyed, always. Matteo obeyed them too, with outward calm and professional poise. But deep below the starched uniform and the rigid silence, something moved. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't reverence either. It was something much more complicated, a shift, a break, a soft inner question that would not be silenced. And soon, that question would have to be answered. Perhaps it was curiosity. That morning, the inauguration day started in silence. Not the silence of tranquility, but the one that anticipates. Matteo woke up before the bells rang, dressing in an order ingrained by tradition and habit. Pants, shirt, chainmail, tunic, belt. Each piece fitted together with the precision of architecture. When he walked through the hallway along with the others, it was as if a page turned in a holy book. They were called to the lower hall for last instructions. Commandant Alrek stood at the front, white-haired and square-jawed, stocky like the stone pillars of the basilica. His voice was gravel scraped across marble. "You are not security," he started. "Let me say it again." A pause. A solitary bootstep rang out like a hammer against stone. "You are not security. You are symbols, living statues. You will stand at precise intervals. You will not respond. You will not vary. If someone had fallen near you, you did not move. If a camera flash blinded you, you did not move. If a child screamed, if a dog barked, if thunder rent the Roman sky, you, doctor, not move." His gaze moved over them with a cutting edge. "If any one of you blinks, it will be recalled longer than the homily." Matteo was in the third row. His face was a mask of obedience, but his mind, as keen as steel, noted each syllable. From midway through morning, St. Peter's Square was a living cathedral. The cobblestones were slick in the soft sun. Seats extended across the square in perfect order. Outside them, a surging tide of pilgrims braved the barricades, their attention locked on history. Matteo positioned himself, third post to the left of the papal dais, halberd vertical at his hip. From there, he could witness almost everything. Cardinals arrayed in velvet upholstered chairs, security blended into marble. The press corps focusing lenses, shifting their aim. A little girl in the front row waved at him. He didn't flinch. Above, the Sistine Chapel choir started warming up. Their voices drifted down in minor harmony, ghost-like, perfect, then dissolved in silence. And then, the world caught its breath. This wasn't any ceremony. It was a passing of gravity, a holy handoff of spiritual building, from one shoulder to another man's. At 10 a.m., sharp, the bells of St. Peter's pealed 12 times. The gates swung open. The procession started. First, the altar servers in white. Their steps moved to a beat heard only by them. Then the bishops, robes flying, faces serious. Then the cardinals, red flashes on pale marble, striding like men with centuries in their joints. Their faces inscrutable, their fingers interlaced, their eyes concealed under ceremonial mitres. And him at last. Pope Leo XIV appeared. Not with trumpets, not with majesty, but with a silence so dense it was like a collapsing cathedral. He stood in only the white cassock, no cape, no crown, no gold. On his feet, the same scuffed brown shoes he'd worn on that initial appearance, the ones that a shoemaker in São Paulo had given to him. His hands were empty, his face was calm. The world was observing, and still Leo didn't walk like a man crowned, but rather one summoned. But what most affected Matteo was how the Pope walked, not like a man ascending to power, but like a priest walking through his parish. Familiar, unhurried, unobstructed. It wasn't grandiosity that moved him, it was simplicity, ease. The crowd's reaction was mixed. There were cheers, yes, but there were also long, confused silences. Some applauded, others merely watched, unsure. Matteo caught a cardinal leaning toward another, whispering something, their lips thin with disapproval. The Pope's every step was followed by Matteo's gaze, as if his every move created ripples in the square. Two of the gendarmerie, Vatican security, stood flanking Leo, keen in black suits, earpieces shining. They followed him half a step behind, unreadable faces, eyes sweeping across the crowd with precision. Leo nodded slowly to a child every 40 or 50 steps, stopped briefly in front of a wheelchair. These were not posed moments. They were natural, human, and that was part of the problem itself. The Vatican, its bureaucracy, its old guard, they preferred their ceremonies scripted, controlled. But Leo, either intentionally or not, was playing a different tune altogether. Matteo sensed it under the marble like a vibration, not instability, but something more fundamental. His eyes flicked to the fourth rank. Lieutenant Dead Grief, where he should be, back stiff, face unreadable. Behind him in the next rank, Stein, the rookie, was faintly white. Poor kid. First public formation, and on a day like today? The procession closed in on Matteo's spot. The Pope was within 10 meters now. Matteo's halberd, shining in the broad sun, caught a momentary reflection of the white cassock. Everyone held breath for a fraction of a second. Camera shutters recorded the instant like muted applause. Somewhere a baby shrieked, but was calmed immediately. The Vatican's internal clock ticked ahead by the beat of centuries. Everything was proceeding precisely according to plan, at least momentarily. As Pope Leo the 14th walked by the front row of officials, it occurred so quickly that for a moment Matteo didn't process what he saw. A flash of movement, ever so slightly too rapid for the precision-controlled environment of the square. A man, a short, lean, middle 40-something looking man, bolted from the periphery of the press section. He shouldered past a barricade and onto the open procession route. A Vatican police officer nearby turned, surprised but didn't budge. One of the gendarmerie agents tensed, his hand going to his earpiece, but then the man pulled his hand from his coat. That was when Matteo acted. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't deliberation. It was instinct, honed through years of training, the repetition, the control, and the single buried memory, his one never shared one, of being immobilized all those years past, as something he loved languished because others had not intervened in time. Matteo crossed the ceremonial space in two purposeful strides. He stepped the line with one word, one uttered firmly. Stop! The piazza gasped, not a shout, not a bellow. But Matteo's voice, hard and authoritative, sliced through the air like a whip across marble and memory. The sound reverberated, resonant for its volume. A child, caught halfway through a sob, ceased to cry. A camera fell with a clatter. The man stood transfixed, caught off guard, his hand still halfway inside his jacket. Matteo put out his left arm, not touching but stopping. His right hand inched lower on the halberd, shifting his grip for leverage. The weapon, ceremonial yes, but still deadly, could drop a man flat with a single stroke of the shaft. Step back, Matteo said, his voice lower now, but no less steady. The words were clear, sharp. Security finally surged forward. Two Vatican officers swept in from behind the Pope, pinning the man's arms and pulling him away from the path. A third officer seized the bag the man was carrying. Another guard caught up beside Matteo, whispering frantically, but Matteo did not catch the words. The man, now yelling in hysterical Italian, was near begging, I'm press! I'm press! I was showing my ID! His voice shook, bewilderment in each syllable. The Pope, still unmoved, stood serenely a few steps away. He was not frightened, but his eyes were intent, observing the moment as from some great distance. His gaze never shifted from the scene, fixed but with a nearly impassive interest. The cardinals seated near him swiveled in their chairs. The choir, halfway through a hymn, dropped into sudden silence. The crowd, hitherto respectful, made a muttering noise, an increasing buzz of voices, like air collecting before a storm. Matteo didn't budge, not yet. He stood frozen, a sentinel who took his stand. It wasn't until the intruder was completely out of the square, pulled quietly but firmly past the barricades, that Matteo stepped back, one, then another. He got back into position, brought up the halberd, and gazed straight ahead just as he had been instructed to do. But it was too late. During those 20 seconds, Matteo had done something almost unimaginable. He had abandoned formation. At a moment observed by billions, he had moved forward when all rule required immobility. Even if it had been the correct choice, even if no harm had come to anyone, the violation was certain. The Vatican may never admit it, but the act itself was a fissure in the system. The ceremony went on, but a tension coursed under its surface. The hymn restarted after a moment's hesitation, but it wasn't the same. The music was altered, weightier, like a different undercurrent running through the melody. Pope Leo moved on, expression inscrutable. He bestowed blessings, kissed altars, delivered his first public speech, and smiled benevolently. But in each camera frame, in each cut, Matteo's moment replayed over and over. The forward step, the raised arm, the crisp command. The internet videos emerged within minutes. One was captioned, "Swiss Guard breaks ranks to protect Pope live." Another, "Pope Leo in danger?" Guards' sudden move sparks panic. Screenshots were picked apart by morning show hosts. Split-second moments were parsed by security experts, with captions and commentary filling comment sections. Some praised Matteo as a hero, a defender of the Pope in a time of peril. Others ridiculed him as an over-enthusiastic statue brought to life, misplaced in a world of managed spectacle. Many asked the same question: why did the Pope's own security lock up? But within the Vatican, the discussions were different. Behind closed doors, where candlelight still glowed and hierarchy was as old as stone, the discussion wasn't of heroism, it was of protocol, it was of optics, it was of control. And in that moment, Matteo Zwingli, the stone of Bern, had cracked the facade. Just a crack, just a step, but it was enough to shatter the marble through. When the last hymn faded and the blessing ended, the crowd broke out into cheers. Cameras panned over waving pilgrims and smiling cardinals. Broadcasters spoke the air full of such words as hopeful, humble, and historic. But for Matteo, what really weighed heavy in the moment wasn't cheers or praise. It wasn't the applauding cardinals or the smiles on the faithful's faces. It was in the silent interval between what had been done and what could never be undone. But behind the scaffolding of ritual, the Vatican was preparing for impact. Matteo stayed in place until the final note of the organ. His physique betrayed him not, nor his features, but below the blanket of uniform, his muscles smoldered, not with the weariness of armor, but from the weight of his act. Hip and jaw turned into each man as they became face to face with only 2 inches separating them. Within an instant, the square cleared. Then the shift commander moved, approaching him with silence. The shoulder tap, once a silent relief marker. Matteo nodded, turned with flair, and marched off post in the same discipline he'd marched on. He wasn't spoken to the remainder of the day. Tentatively inside the guard quarters, no one mentioned his name out loud, but each man had seen it. Each man had observed the step, the break, the ripple. One young recruit, Stein, gave a look as Matteo walked by in the hall. Not pity, not admiration, just a question in his eyes that didn't require a voice. Matteo continued walking, the burden of his choice weighing on him more than any uniform ever had. By late afternoon, the world was already gnawing on the moment. Footage of the disruption had been cut, looped, and slowed. Internet headlines mushroomed on every screen. Swiss Guard responds, quickly during Pope's walk. Was there a genuine threat? Guard breaks procedure. Pope undeterred. Who was the intruder? Hero or overreach? Vatican insider provokes questions. The individual involved, known within hours, was a freelance photojournalist from Florence, newly granted access to the papers. His background was spotless, his credentials in order. The article he had grabbed for had been a press pass folded into his coat lining. No weapon, no malice, just bad timing, bad judgment, and a gesture that seemed so much like something else. By nightfall, the photographer had been let go, but Matteo's gesture couldn't be taken back. Within the Vatican Secretariat, reactions were written, not press statements, but internal memoranda, the kind that went around in Latin, never beyond stained glass. Cardinal Gregori, Pontifical Ceremonies Prefect, was quoted as calling the event a visible break in sacred performance. Someone heard another official use the term liturgical contamination, but the shared dance remained silent, not officially. That silence, Matteo knew, was not neutrality. It was weight being measured. By sundown, no order had arrived. No summons, no rebuke, no formal notification. But Matteo knew it would arrive. It always did. Much like his father's tailor's shears, silent, sharp, and unavoidable. He went back to his quarters just before Vespers, unbuckled his armor, cleaned his halberd, and put everything back where it belonged with the same care as ever. The routine soothed him more than prayer could. Outdoors, the city hummed with the final hours of daylight. Tourists shoveled gelato in front of Castel San Angelo. Pilgrims huddled around fountains. Somewhere, a Maria in the key of longing was played by a guitarist. Matteo sat on the edge of his bunk, straight back, staring at the wall across from him. He felt no remorse. He had broken formation. It wasn't an error, but the Vatican and the world would view it that way. That was true, but he had done it because the boundary between ceremony and risk had been obscured for one breath of time, and no one else had stirred. So he had. What followed, he could not prevent, but he would meet it upright. It came the following morning. A sealed envelope slipped under his door. Thick parchment, no seal, but the crest of the pontifical Swiss Guard impressed into the wax. He opened it without ceremony. One sentence. Report to the common dance office at 8:45 in full dress. He had expected it, but something in his chest still constricted. Matteo showed up on time, breastplate buffed, boots aligned to regulation shine. His halberd left at the door as protocol required. He knocked once, firmly. Enter. The room was colder than normal. Commandant Alric sat behind his desk, hands steepled, face set in granite. To his left was Archbishop Tremblay, secretary for papal protocol, a man Matteo had never spoken to, drawn and pinch-nosed, wrapped in folds of silk and power. And on the opposite wall, arms folded, was Cardinal Gregori, the prefect, one of the few men in Rome whose frown could still entire corridors. No greetings, no prayers, no forward. Ulrich indicated the chair. Matteo sat. The silence was precise. Then, without glancing up, Ulrich started. Yesterday, at the Holy Father's inauguration, you broke formation. Yes, sir. You strayed from the ceremonial line. Yes, sir. You spoke to a civilian. Yes, sir. You crossed a secure path and extended your arm in a command gesture, all of which were beyond your assigned duties. Yes, sir. Why? Matteo's hands lay flat on his thighs. His voice was even, but not robotic. I thought there was a threat. The security did not move. I acted to guard the Holy Father's approach. You are not on protection duty, Tremblay interrupted. I know. Then you overstepped your orders, the Archbishop went on. And while doing so, you disrupted the flow of liturgical procedure. You brought interference into the holiest public ceremony of this pontificate. Cardinal Gregori moved forward. Do you know what you put at risk? He said, his voice silky but incisive. If cameras had recorded that man falling, bleeding, struggling, do you have any idea how that would have appeared? You're not a police officer, Zwingli. You are an icon. That uniform is dance. Matteo's eyes did not flinch. I did what I was trained to do before I ever wore the uniform. Gregory's lip curled. Then maybe you should go back to that training. Eric at last raised his hand, palm open, an ancient signal between commanders and men. The room quieted. After a lengthy silence, Ulrich said, We are not doubting your intent, Zwingli. But intent does not shield action. There are forces in motion here you do not perceive. Hierarchy, order, optics. The Holy Father was never in danger. The man was press. Matteo replied levelly. I didn't know that, and nobody else did. Exactly, said Tremblay, which is why it was not for you to decide. A second pause. Gregori moved towards the window and gazed out over the Vatican gardens. You've served 13 years. Impeccable record. Commendations from 4 visiting heads of state. Not even a reprimand for being late. But what you did yesterday, he drew an air. You revealed an inner hesitation. You revealed others' uncertainty. He turned slowly. That is more hurtful than failure. Matteo let the pause hang there, then spoke softly. If you ask me to apologize, I will. No one is asking, Ulrich said. Not yet. Gregory crossed his arms. If this were 10 years ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You'd be gone quietly, unobtrusively. He turned to the others. But this pope has his inclinations. That was the first time anybody in the room spoke it outright. This wasn't merely about one guard breaking formation. It was about a pope who had disturbed the foundations of ritual. A pope who walked with the poor, who spoke extemporaneously, who broke ranks in his own way, and who quite possibly saw something in Matteo's gesture that resonated with his own decisions. Until further notice, said Ulrich, closing the folder before him, you will stay on restricted ceremonial duty. No disciplinary action, subject to internal review, which Matteo recognized was Vatican speak, for we'll wait and see if this goes away. He remained standing, saluted, turned, and went without a word. Outside in the hallway beyond the door, the corridor was brighter than previously. Sunlight streamed through glass-stained saints, casting shards of color up the corridor. He moved with slow deliberateness, making each step intentionally. If the previous day left a fissure, then the current day acknowledged it. Yet he felt not shame, merely clarity. The summoning arrived approximately after compline. Matteo was alone in the chapel, polishing the brass brim of his halberd in silence, when a young aide slipped into the room noiselessly and posted himself at the back. Not a word, merely a nod. Matteo nodded once as well and arose. He was led by the aide through paths rarely trodden in silence, past papal antechambers, across velvet-draped thresholds, past portraits of popes whose reigns continued centuries into remembrance. They burst out into the Vatican gardens under the stars and quiet. Pope Leo XIV was waiting near the fountain alone. No guardsmen, no advisories, no protocol. Gray wool sweater thrown over his white cassock and a small wooden rosary hung in one hand. His shoes, those identical worn brown, lay half within shadow. "Matteo," he said softly, as if calling an old acquaintance rather than soldier. "Your Holiness," answered Matteo with a bow. Leo did not request him to stand. He didn't require it. Air had changed. This was no reprimand. This was no ceremony. They stood stock still within silence for some time. Sounds were the steady ripple of fountain behind them. "You made waves yesterday," the Pope said softly at last. "Yes, Your Holiness," replied Matteo. "They're arguing terms of decorum, optics, overreach," Pope Leo went on. "And no one asks the only thing I want to know." He turned to Matteo fully about. "What did you observe?" Matteo didn't hesitate. "A man who was moving too fast, who went inside his coat. The security didn't budge." "I did," Leo nodded thoughtfully, weighing. "I used to have a young priest in Brazil step in front of me in a machete." Matteo blinked. He was unarmed. He wasn't quick, but he was courageous. Leo stated, "He prevented a boy from doing something he would have regretted forever." He gazed upwards, his eyes catching a band of moonlight. "They said he broke parish rules, told him he went beyond his role." He smiled weakly. "I ordained him the following year." Matteo said nothing. He wasn't certain he was supposed to. "I saw the footage," Leo said from 5 angles. He let the sentence hang. "You moved like a man who had done it before, but also like a man who didn't want to." "I didn't," Matteo said. "But no one else did." Leo chuckled. Not mockery, but quiet appreciation. "They're not going to punish you," the Pope said. "Not formally." "I know," Matteo replied, "but they won't forget it either." "I know that too." The Pope moved closer, his voice lower now. "There's something dangerous about being first," he said. The Pope's words hung in the chilly air as Matteo stood beside the fountain, looking out into the garden, thinking over everything that had occurred. He understood the severity of what he had done was not about some isolated act, a moment in time. It was about the values to which he was adhering, something more than duty or tradition. It was about doing the right thing, even when it was not in the script. The way to duty was more often paved with silence, tradition, and conformity. But Matteo's decision reminded those who were around him, and maybe even him, that sometimes what mattered most was not remaining stationary in the presence of danger, but moving forward. Was Matteo justified in breaking formation? With authority, tradition, and protocol staring him in the face, would you have stood up as he did, or would you have remained in line? What is loyalty really in the midst of actual danger, when something within you makes you feel that standing your ground isn't the solution? Let us hear your opinions in the comments. And if this tale touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button and ring the bell so you don't miss the episode tomorrow. Undefined, we publish daily, taking you through unseen moments of duty, honor, and sacrifice. Tell someone who still has faith that loyalty doesn't always equal standing still. Watch our other videos on your screen today, and we will see you tomorrow, same time, for another unforgettable story.